want to welcome a very important and very special person to COMPA and to ASPA. He goes by the name of Dr. Alan Rosenbaum. Alan is the professor of public administration and the founding director of the Institute for Public Management and Community Service and the Center for Democracy and Good Governance at Florida International University in Miami, Florida. So he's always enjoying good weather. He went to FIU as dean of its School of Public Affairs and Services, and he was a past president of COMPA. And today I present to you that he is president once more of COMPA. Excuse me, did I say COMPA? I'm so used to saying COMPA. ASPA, the American Society for Public Administration. So there's so much more I could say about this young man, but with the time, I want to just go ahead and say welcome to you, and thank you so much for being here to give us a warm welcome from ASPA. Emoji time, clapping time. Thank you so much, Dr. Rosenbaum. You have it unmuted.
Some people would say I sound better muted, actually. In any event, thank you, Kalichi, for inviting me, and it is an honor to be here with old friends, many old friends of COMPA. COMPA is obviously a very valuable part and an important part of ASPA and its long history, I believe 51 years at this point, is been very beneficial, not only just to ASPA as an organization, but to the field as a whole. Certainly long before issues of diversity, equality, inclusion had made it to both the national agenda and the ASPA agenda, COMPA was pioneering concern and urging concern. And in one sense, the organization should feel a real degree of pride because largely your efforts have put these concerns on the agenda of ASPA, and that has been very, very beneficial for ASPA as an organization. Some indication of the importance that COMPA plays within ASPA is that the COMPA president automatically becomes a member of the ASPA National Council. That is really the only non-elected position on the ASPA National Council, but it is felt that the COMPA president is such an important part of the field that automatically they become a member of the ASPA National Council. While I am speaking of ASPA, let me mention just briefly one of the very important initiatives that I take particular pride in that has occurred during my two-year term as president, which will be coming to an end at the end of this national conference, which will be, I believe, March 21st to 24th. And it will be a Zoom conference, so easy to access. But one of the things that I had proposed, and the National Council, I should add there are some things I've proposed the National Council didn't accept, but one of the things that I did propose and that they accepted wholeheartedly was the creation of a Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion as a permanent part of ASPA. As you know, ASPA has sections that focus on research. It has chapters that focus on local activities and that are locally focused. But for the past 30 years, for example, it has had a center for accountability and management, or accountability and performance. I always confuse that. That center has ensured that throughout those 30 years that it has existed, that there has been a steady stream of program activity, focus at national conference, etc., on issues of performance measurement, effective management, etc. Well, just this past year, we have created a second center that will be a permanent entity within the framework of ASPA, and that is the Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which has been named after George Frederickson, who was a pioneer in the field, introducing concerns about that. This center will ensure that on a continuing basis, ASPA focuses on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, both in terms of our webinar programming, in terms of our national conference, in terms of literally all of our activities. And I think it's particularly important that we did this year. As you know from the very kind introduction that was accurate in every respect except calling me a young man, you can see for yourself that I'm hardly a young man at this point in my life. I wish I was young at heart, but I am young at heart, but the body shows a bit of wear and tear over the years. But in any event, as I'm sure you know, we have a governor here in Florida who is a major opponent, a very active opponent of issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And unfortunately, his ideas are being picked up in some other states as well. So really issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion are really under attack these days. Our governor, for example, has required of all of the universities, including mine, emails of any email that mentions diversity, equity, and inclusion over the course of the past year has been required to be sent to the Speaker of the House of Representatives office. Now, for our university alone, that's probably 40, 50,000 emails. As a university with 3,000 faculty. In addition to that, and I should say our administration says that's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal. It doesn't take them very long to punch in Alan Rosenbaum and see what the heck I've been saying, some of which hasn't been always totally kind about our governor. Also, you followed some of the other attacks on diversity that the governor has initiated. Essentially, he's vetoing out of the state budget all of the funding for any programs that deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think it is really exceedingly important that at this particular time, organizations like ASPA and COMPA renew our commitment to these very, very critical values. And these attacks occur in other ways as well. For example, we have legislation that essentially makes makes it pretty, puts me, for example, at risk of going to jail as a result of what I say in one of my doctoral seminars, which deals with intergovernmental relations, state and local government. As I point out to students, we talk about federalism as this great, brilliant invention of our founding fathers. Well, it was an invention in part driven by the need to enforce slavery in the South. So we had to give the states significant local authority and created federalism. Well, saying that to my students, which I did a few weeks ago, puts me at risk of going to jail in the state of Florida with the legislation that is currently being challenged in the courts. The interesting thing, I'll stop in just a moment because I know you didn't invite me here for this purpose, but I think it's so important that I really feel a need to talk about it. The interesting thing about the challenge to this legislation, which is now at the US District Court level, and likely going to the Supreme Court, is the way the state is actually arguing in defense of it. They are saying that all of us faculty members at the 13 public universities in the state of Florida are agents of the state. And as agents of the state, we sacrifice all right to say whatever we want if the state does not agree. And that includes, and this is being argued by the lawyers for the state of Florida, that our First Amendment rights under the Constitution are forsaken when we agree to become state employees in Florida. Well, as you can see, we've gone from attack on DEI to essentially attack on academic freedom, freedom of speech, and the like. And so, I can't say enough about the importance of the values that COMPA and ASPA have represented and the importance of what essentially is the fight that we are all going to be a part of. So I know this is not the kind of cheery opening that people normally want. I will get back to the cheery part very briefly by just saying it really is a wonderful opportunity to be with you. This is a great conference, a great organization that has made a real difference for our field. And I congratulate you and urge you to keep going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosenbaum. I really appreciate your presence as always in your time and the thoughts that you shared with us that are very relevant to COMPA. Our Region 2 representative, COMPA Region 2 representative is going to actually do the introductions. I do want to recognize our Region 2 representative, Dr. Elijah Ajipong, because whether he knows it or not, he is an amazing human being, and a lot of what is happening in this conference is because of his diligence, his support, and his assisting in planning this conference. So I am so grateful to you, Dr. Ajipong. Dr. Ajipong is an associate professor of, he's an associate professor at Regent University, where he is also the MPA program coordinator in the Robertson School of Government. I've known him for years now. If you guys don't know where Regent School University is, it's in Virginia Beach. So, ask him to let you visit from time to time and hang out on the beach. But he got his BA in political science from the University of Ghana, and his MPA from the University of Akron in Ohio, and finally his terminal degree, his PhD from the University of Missouri. He is an active member of ASPA. He is a very active member of COMPA. And with that, I introduce to you my friend, Dr. Elijah Ajipong.
Thank you, President Chuku, and it's my honor and privilege to introduce our delegate and plenary speaker for this morning. And so I'm just going to do that. Delegate Melissa Wells is a Democratic member of the Maryland House of Delegates, currently representing the 40th Legislative District in West Baltimore City since 2019. In terms of her background, Delegate Wells earned a BA in Political Science, Law, and Sociology from the University of California at Riverside. She also has an MA in Public Policy from American University. Delegate Wells is a bold advocate for the 40th District. She's a member of she's a labor leader and also a financial specialist. In terms of committee assignment, Delegate Wells has served on various committees, including the Environment and Transportation Committee, the Housing and Real Property Subcommittee, Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee, Natural Resources, Agriculture, and Open Space Subcommittee. She's also currently serving as the Deputy Whip for the Majority Caucus, Vice Chair of the Legislative Black Caucus, Chair of the Legislative Black Caucus Legislative Review Board, a member of the Legislative Latino Caucus, Women Legislators of Maryland, Second Vice Chair, Baltimore City Legislation, and a Maryland Legislative Transit Caucus. In addition to this, during her term in office over the span of 5 years, Delegate Wells has secured over $100 million for the 40th District. She's given over $150,000 in scholarships to students in her district. She secured investment into the urban agro business in Baltimore City for growing access to healthy food, and creating a pipeline for future entrepreneurs. She's passed legislations to reduce barriers to opioid treatment programs, helping fight the opioid crisis. Delegate Wells has passed legislations to restore local control of Baltimore City Police Department, helping use the decision about police at the local level to improve the community relations. She's passed legislations that will give automatic expungement for non-convictions, that is granting individuals a real shot at a second chance. In her professional life, Delegate Wells works with the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. Building Trades Union, where she serves as Baltimore's underserved community specialist. She helps residents, including women, youth, and returning citizens find apprenticeships and secure family supporting careers. Melissa Wells knows that creating opportunities for Baltimoreans to participate in building stronger communities, a more inclusive economy is the only way to ensure a brighter future for Baltimore. So with that, I think I'm throwing it back to the president as we welcome Delegate Melissa Wells.
Well, thank you for throwing it back to me. I'm throwing it to you, Delegate Wells. Go for it.
Thank you so much. That was a glowing introduction. Sometimes you think you're so like, why am I so tired? Like what, it's because there's so much work that we are always doing for our districts. I know that's just not myself, but I know all of you that are here at this conference this week, that are here this morning. I know all of you are equally doing that and even much more in your communities and in your state. So, but I just want to welcome you all and just say good morning, Conference of Minority Public Administrators. I'm just excited to be here this morning. Had some issues with the connectivity, but our IT department is fabulous, was able to help get things sorted. But I really want to thank you for the invitation to speak at this conference. And I really extend that my thanks and gratitude to you, President Ozochukwu, for inviting me to speak to this esteemed body of public administrators. I want to begin by saying thank you to each and every one of you for your commitment to service and the significant contribution you make to improving the conditions of communities across the country. I know how important public administrators are to overseeing the federal, state, and local agencies, to production of public policies, to the coordination of public programs. And I am personally grateful for all the work you do. In fact, I witness it every day in my day-to-day, in my capacity as an elected official, in my personal job, and just in me being a citizen of the public, like all of us, like we all are. So I just know that all of you are critical to ensuring we put in place legislation and policies that help address racial and economic inequality. And I must say, these policies wouldn't be effective without your help executing them, be it ground up, top down, or from the middle. But regardless of the direction from which it comes from, you are vital every step of the way. I see this firsthand, especially as a delegate. I know that the legislation we pass is often only as effective in creating change as the public administrators who write legislation or provide oversight and implementation of the legislation that we pass. You are equally important and oftentimes play a key role in the development of our legislation. I want to be very clear about that because we work hand in hand. Because I know that oftentimes you see firsthand challenges on a micro level that we often first see the symptoms of at the macro level. And so in many ways, you are the line of first defense. And I thank you for being that, because you are necessary. It's been said in the last few years that America is facing a racial reckoning. And for many people of color in America, we have had a reckoning with our race for much, if not all of our lives. But regardless of what we call it, I think we can agree that we are living in a moment where conversations and call out of white supremacy and structural racism are made in spaces and institutions that were and maybe are still perpetrators of these twin evils, right? We have to be real about that part. There's some of the folks that, I think are thinking about how we can change address these issues, but they still institutionally are harboring a lot of those practices. But we are in a time where there is more acknowledgement and intention toward addressing racial equity and inequality. And it is not enough, though, however, that we set goals or that we acknowledge, but we must pave a path for us to eradicate these inequalities. So one major way that we reach them is by having policy and decision makers who are experienced in leading with equity, who understand that a room of people from diverse backgrounds and experiences is necessary for collective success, who also know that we must view policy from the approach of how we ensure we set everyone in all communities. I feel like sometimes we have to repeat ourselves when it comes to talking about everyone and all, but we set all communities up for success based on where they start the race. Last and most importantly, to be successful in building an inclusive pathway to success, we must include and value the voice and leadership of people from communities that have been the closest to and the most impacted by the problems that we seek to address. And we must not only include them, but we must make them the head of the table in these rooms where these discussions are had and decisions are made. And to also talk about that, setting these goals and setting the table, we all know it takes a lot of work because there is still resistance, especially from those who deny or refuse to acknowledge their privilege, from some who think diversity doesn't need to be visual, does not need to look like us, the people that are in this convening. And there are colleagues who are seemingly allies at times who can quickly become a major roadblock to our efforts to increase and strengthen diversity and the power of diverse voices in spaces. So although there will remain challenges, suspected and unsuspected, great public administrators like yourselves are always nimble and identify opportunities to remove these barriers. And in my experience, there's a few methods that come to mind. So I have a couple that I wanted to list out. The first one is, or the first couple, I guess, is data, and more data. I know I'm speaking to the choir when I'm talking to a room of public administrators, but we know that data tells us the story. It provides us the proof. I learned quickly as a new delegate, there are things that over my career that I had experienced, that I knew the data sets on, that I knew anecdotally. And we know that oftentimes anecdotes are not enough, that we need objective items. We need data to be able to signify the problem. And oftentimes I'd have colleagues say, well, where is this proof, right? So obviously, if I talk to a constituent in my district, if I see, if you look at homelessness and you can see the individuals that are there, but if you haven't counted the number of homeless individuals, then some might say it's not a real problem, even though we know it is a problem. But oftentimes as public administrators, as public stewards, we have to be able to have objective information, have the data and the numbers that can show that this is a problem, but also it provides us a compass, so to speak, to let us know where we need to get to and where we're coming from. So we have to always be able to pinpoint these issues numerically. And it's painstaking at times, but it's necessary in order for us to be able to get our legislation passed, or for us to get in place the programs or get the proper resources to address these problems. Second, relationship building. Relationship building in partnership with your peers and colleagues across agencies, with elected officials like myself, across various levels of government. In many cases where there is a no in front of you, if you go elsewhere, there is likely that there could be a yes. Also, these relationships are important when you are troubleshooting. Oftentimes, when two or more heads are together, that we know that it's better in the sense of identifying solutions. Sometimes your theory of change initially might be, although a good one, may not be the appropriate one for that problem that you're looking at. And so having others be able that you can work with, that you can kind of build out that theory of change, build out the policies that you want to recommend, or the policies that really will be effective in addressing those issues. That's where those relationships they come in handy, and they, I think, only improve our success as public servants. I also want to mention that we really have to lean into the moment. And what I mean by the moment is, I mean by this administration, we have under the Biden-Harris administration, we have such a very keen focus on equity, on racial equity, on improving access to resources. We have the Justice 40 initiative, which has made the goal that 40% of overall benefits of federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution, and to ensure that formula grants that I was at an event where the Undersecretary of Commerce was just explaining how important it is at the state level and local level to look at not just how much formula grants are coming from the federal government, but how do we actually administer those formula grants? Are there ways that we could, pinpoint or narrowly focus some of those resources on areas of concentrated poverty, on dealing with issues that are systemically impacting the communities where you all live and work? And so I think that we are in a moment that, at least in my, almost 20-year career, I have not seen the focus on equity at especially federal level be what it is now. It is not perfect. There's always room for growth, but to hear people talk about white supremacy, talk about structural racism from the highest seat of the government, I think is a testament to some of the changes that have happened. And then if we also look at currently right now, almost nearly $4 trillion that will be leveraged from the Infrastructure Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, from the CHIPS and Science Act, and then from the Inflation Reduction Act, these resources will be utilized to create great jobs in communities, create contracting opportunity, and also make our communities more resilient and grow in terms of a better public infrastructure and also addressing climate change. And there's very clear language within those various bills that talk about targeting minority contractors, targeting our communities of color that have historically been disadvantaged and have not been included in the conversation, and targeting access to life-changing career opportunities that help build economic wealth. And overall, in this moment we're in right now, the focus is on how do we triple down on this $4 trillion investment to yield significant and robust economic growth in all communities, but especially in communities of color, namely, that have not always had access to that wealth and have not been a focus. So it is important that we capitalize on this moment, that we lean into that equity, because they're looking for it, right? So we already know that we have the tools as practitioners of color. We often have the tools, we have the proximity to understanding these issues, because in many cases we live it and we see it every day. And so we should use that to our benefit. And then last but not least, we have to continue to foster and cultivate new leadership, especially in spaces like COMPA and through coalition with peers and groups with shared goals. We have to also focus on empowering our young people, those that are coming behind us. I know when I was growing up in the late 90s, I didn't know what public administrators were. I didn't know what public policy was, right? And I'm always amazed that we now have more of the language. Well, that language is more widely accessible, I should say. And so organizations like COMPA, legislators like myself, really, I know we do a lot to engage our, up and coming, our high schoolers or younger students to understand that there's a pathway for them, what this industry looks like. And that's important because at some point, we will pass the baton. At least I plan to pass the baton at some point. And I look forward to doing that. And we must also continue to, like I said, focus on empowering our youth and teach them about the industry. And then lastly, we have to spread the reach of our networks. And so, that means, folks that work in the public sector, partnering with folks in the private sector across all levels of government, and also looking at our philanthropic side as well. But the more that we continue to work and build out public administrators that are like-minded, that are focused on equity, focused on increasing economic security and opportunity in these various spaces, we have more voices in those spaces that we can kind of pull together like a beautiful choir. I guess you could kind of use that analogy, but like a beautiful choir that sings a hymnal of racial equity and economic success and opportunity. So it's in moments like this, leaders like you, and organizations like COMPA and elected officials like myself, we are finally able to successfully advance legislation that is chipping away, albeit it feels like it's slow, but it is chipping away decades and even centuries-long policies that intentionally sideline and created barriers for communities of color. It is a work done by practitioners affiliated with COMPA who are fueling this change as we speak. And people often say luck is where preparation meets opportunity. And that's exactly why practitioners of color will continue to capitalize on the demand that this moment is creating for their talent, their expertise, lived experience, and proximity to structural racism. So COMPA is so necessary in this moment. I want to thank you for what you do, because you are so necessary. And this organization has remained committed to strengthening and increasing the role of public administrators of color, the role they play in public policy. And your role will continue to be necessary to successfully advance racial equity and address disparities at all levels. So I just want to end by thanking you for your service and commitment to improving the lives and conditions of so many communities where you live and work. It is your vocal and unwavering dedication to eradicating racial disparities that has helped us arrive in this moment that we are in. It is your decades of work that is equipping equity-minded decision makers and elected officials like me with the tools and information necessary to advance policies that increase access to opportunity, especially in communities of color. So I just want to thank you for your service and commitment to making our communities better. And I just thank you for your leadership. And it's an honor to just be able to speak to you all this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delegate Wells. That was well said. And I actually can imagine I have lots of questions, and all these folks probably have some questions too. If I may begin, and then we will just go from there. My first question is, what do you think is the biggest like if we could only, which is not ideal, and there's so many different issues, but what do you think is the first thing that we need to do? This is a room of practitioners, a room of higher ed, educators, professors, researchers. That's what we do day in and day out. This is a research conference. And so what is your number one, and what do you think maybe the role of a researcher, educator's number one should be also?
No, that's a great question. So I think, especially when we think about our researchers, I'll tell you, I see, look here in Maryland. So we have our Department of Legislative Services, and they are responsible for doing research, for helping us write legislation. And one of the things, especially as a Black caucus, that we've been really trying to improve on is, one, growing the number of people of color, especially Black workers in that space, because a lot of the legislation, they bring a perspective to it in some cases, right? And so it's not that they're nefarious, but that perspective is going to also kind of play out in how the legislation is written. But research, though, I think that research is an area where I think there's not enough resources for it. It's not always a pathway that can be lucrative in some cases. And so a lot of times people don't go down that pathway if they are not able to access a lot of scholarships and what have you. And so I think that we definitely need to find ways to support and provide more funding for researchers, especially if it's Black researchers of color, organizations like COMPA that are helping cultivate those researchers and support them, our HBCUs as well. But we definitely need to identify, and this is something where maybe we have an opportunity to work more closely with you all on this, because I know that a lot of my colleagues here in the legislature would agree that we need more folks that look like you in our agencies that are, that are helping roll out programs, that are identifying, they're charged with, if we have a mandate for having Office of Equity and Diversity and impact. We also need to be thinking about, well, who are the folks in there that are going to be keeping tally of the data, who are going to be establishing the research projects to identify what our problems are. And so I think research is where we really still do have I don't want to say a blind spot, but I think it's an area where we really need to be very intentional about putting in place people that are utilizing the equity lens, that have a track record of looking at equity and thinking about our racial disparities.
Thank you. Thank you. The floor is open. If you have a question for Delegate Wells, feel free. Dr. Billingsley? Oh, okay, you unmuted. I thought you had a question.
No, I'm sorry. I need to mute then. But I will make a comment. I think sometimes a partnership with the institution. I know you said, well, you don't have money to fund, and of course, faculty and researchers, they are looking for funded opportunities to do work, but there are other opportunities to partner with institutions to provide internships, pathways in which students might be introduced to the government in Maryland and see as an option. You have University of Baltimore right there, but you also have Morgan State University as an HBCU. That's right. That's right there that you may want to tap into. Many of these universities have programs in public policy and administration. At the master's level, they often require internships or some kind of experiential learning. And so that's one way that, if you could provide paid internships, students. So that could be one pathway to get more students of color and women introduced to as a preferred option.
Yep.
Because what we end up having oftentimes, we do have people who go into these positions, but it's a last resort. And I
Mm,
think if we're proactive, then we can market government as a preferred
Yes.
career path and
Yeah.
not one that people just fall into. So I think, and we're competing. I mean, governments are competing
Mhm.
with private industry who also want our graduates because they are well-rounded and they do have an understanding of policy and the integration or intersection between policies and the business sector policy and, you know, the philanthropic sector policies, you know, with all of these various, and even with the international focus. So I think instead of focusing completely on not having the funding, think about what you do have to offer. And I think internships might be an excellent pathway to get students into that workspace.
Absolutely. No, internships in Maryland, internships are a great opportunity. Unfortunately, what happens is the pay for at the state level is at least in Maryland is not competitive is really what it boils down to. And I've heard this from several agencies, whether it's from our comptroller's office. And so we also are trying to find ways that we can also become more competitive in terms of the pay scale to keep people. And the other way, as you were talking, I was thinking one of the other areas where we have opportunity is being more intentional. I know that we do have researchers and faculty and colleagues of yours that serve on different boards and commissions in the state that, you know, have oversight over various issue areas. And so you continue to be more intentional in expansion of seats and roles on those boards and commissions that are really vital to in directing key policy and kind of key day-to-day is another area where we should be just be mindful of.
Okay, and if I can, Madam President, I'd like to just say one other thing to Ms. Wells.
absolutely.
I think one of the opportunities that COVID provided is that there are many people who are rethinking work.
Mm,
They are rethinking how they want to spend the rest of their lives.
yeah.
And so sometimes wages may not be competitive, but there are other benefits. And I think we fail sometimes in government to talk about what those other benefits are. And so liberal leave policies, you know, those kinds of things that might be attractive to a young mother or a young woman who is planning to start her family or has already started and is looking for not just a place to make a lot of money, but also a place that is family friendly, you know, those kind of things. And I think that with COVID, that's one of the things that I have been observing. And in conversations with colleagues and students all around, people are really rethinking what it means for work and rethinking what success looks like. You know, because we've been told what is success, but I think people are rethinking that. And it's an opportunity for us to kind of capitalize on it and think about that in the public sector is, again, focusing on what we do offer. And, you know, and owning up, as you said, the salaries are not competitive. But for me, I remember when my daughter was young, flexibility was a very important piece for me. And I think now for a lot of young workers, they're not interested in grinding out like we did. We, you know, like a lot of us did, working 60-hour weeks. You know, they want work-life balance. And so these are the kinds of things I think that we can highlight as we began talking. Why should I work in government? Why should I get paid, you know, less than what I'm worth? And so it's the pay, but it's also benefits that do have a cash value. So
Yeah.
I'll just leave it there.
We've got Brian Alexander.
I just want to say that I'm sorry for the noise in the background. I'm driving, but you hit the nail on the point, because I had a lot of people saying that in the private sector that they want to make, come to the private sector. You want to make money. That's where you're going to make money at. But sometimes with the private sector, it has its ups and its downs. But when you're in government, you have a steady pay. And and also with the benefits and the retirement plans, I think you're right. Government has to start marketing themselves in order to get the right people in the positions and show it's just not about the pay. There's other things that you will receive when accumulated these government jobs on all level of government, local, state, regional, or federal.
I agree with you all in terms of there's definitely the work-life balance is not just about the pay. And I think that the key kind of takeaway I would give is that it's also about how healthy is the space you're going into, right? So if you have an understaffed private sector, we know when you're understaffed, a lot of the work will fall on the few that are there. If you have an understaffed public sector outfit, a lot of the work will fall on the few. So definitely, having at least that great work-life balance, those other, as you said, Ms. Billingsley, having the other aspect of the non-cash piece, right? I work in the union sector in construction. I tell people all the time, you might come in as an apprentice, you can make $25 in your pocket first year, non-union, but with the union, you might start at 20, but you're going to exceed 25 in a year or two, but you're going to make another 10 or 15 in your medical, in your fringe benefits, in your retirement, sometimes an additional kind of not 401k, but an annuity that is money. And then also you don't have to pay for your additional family members, their medical care, right? It's just all included. So there is also, I think, talking to our communities, talking to people about some of those non-cash benefits, because especially I'm a Black person, I won't tell you how you all identify, but I'm a Black person. And I know that I did not learn about a lot of these things because my father wasn't part of a union. I didn't learn about a lot of these non-cash benefits because my family didn't really have careers where they had those things, right? And so even communicating to our new workers that maybe don't come from communities or families that know about this, that this is a value, is also an opportunity that we can use. And the federal government jobs have created the Black middle class, especially here in the Washington metro area. Prince George's is what it is because of DC government and the federal government, right? And so there is a lot of opportunity with the federal government, and they are moving towards more what do you call it? Not virtual, but more remote, right? Maybe in the office one day and then you're, working from home. So I think it's definitely a balance of all, but I think we have to just make sure that we have a healthy public and private sector where your job you're not having to take on the role of many, and then you don't get paid more either when you do that often.
Thank you, Tony Ulmer.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tony Ulmer. I'm from Houston, Texas, a graduate student with the Texas Southern University EMPA program. And I just want to diverse just a tad because I'm down below the Mason-Dixon line. We don't have that same liberal attitude in the state of Texas. And yesterday, Governor Abbott and the University of Texas of A&M has initiated a new policy. It's called DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, to disregard the fact of race, gender, disability, and hire in state agencies as far as their credentials or their professional criteria. That sounds wonderful. But my thing is, as we try in the public administration field to incorporate more people of color, And I benefited from that being a public servant with the City of Houston Fire Department. And I was recruited under a federal mandate the City of Houston had to follow. So 25, 30 years later, the state of Texas is saying everything is fine now. We should be able to just hire on your credentials. So my thing is, how do we, as public administrators, get these positions, whether it's research, management, or executive positions, when the country seems to be falling into, we're all equal now. We're just going to go on the fact that you're a master's level employee, or, so forth and so on. And then you have the other side, where it's the private side, that tends to be more lenient. But on the governmental side, whether it's local, state, or, well, local and state, and we do need the federal government to step in, but the Supreme Court, you know how that is going. So I just want to put that out there to see what kind of viewpoints that y'all have. Thank you.
No, Mr. Ulmer, you're absolutely right. So I do a lot of work with I work for the National Building Trades. So I help support our councils across the country, and I also work closely with local governments as well. Can you not hear me? Oh, so I think one of the things that I do know, because I work with folks that are below the Mason-Dixon line, so in some very red states. And where I have seen some opportunity is that there are some very red states that have some very blue cities and jurisdictions, right? And so that is where there's some opportunity to really kind of dig in, where they may not be able to be very vocal about it, because some governors will come down hard just because they feel like they gotta, move their weight and they have to show that they're in control. But there are those conversations that are happening regionally. And I would hope that in Houston, which has a large minority community, Black and brown, that there would be perhaps a contingency of folks either in the regional council of government, or at the city level, or just regionally in some form or fashion, that are having that conversation. Because the bottom line is that you want to have the population that lives where you are. They need to be a part of your government. They need to be a part of the businesses, whether it's a private or public sector. And so I think there's opportunity there. And I understand that this conversation around race and equity, I know not every place. I think especially in Florida and Texas, that I think have governors that are really adamant about they don't believe it, that certain things happen. I don't have to tell you, you live through it. So I'm not gonna cause any more PTSD for you when it comes to that. But I will say that there are folks in your area that I know, at least in the work that I do around workforce development, they are diverse and they are engaging and they are successful. On the private sector side, I can't speak for all private sector. But my experience is that this is a priority of the private sector. And in some cases, the private sector is helping encourage government to the extent that they can. And also the bottom line is that they're going to take credit for the success. That's the part that can be infuriating at times. They're going to take credit for they being, some of these more hostile governors. They will take credit for, they may not believe that we need to focus on diversity, but they will take credit for there being more diverse folks in these different positions of power. So it's definitely an uphill battle. It's not the same everywhere, Mr. Ulmer, I understand that. And so that's why there's just different approaches that we have to use. But I think the key takeaway I would say is that building that coalition of folks and organizations that can look at different ways of making those end steps. It may not be through actual legislation, but if there's someone on the inside that knows these jobs are coming, and just saying, hey, make sure that you're applying for it. Maybe they're on the hiring committee. utilize every opportunity that there may be for folks in your area to be able to capitalize on a more diverse hiring practices. I hope that made sense.
I think so. It makes sense to me. I have, if I can pivot a little bit and ask about your background and how you feel it might have prepared you for where you are now. I'm curious if an elected official position is something that you always knew you wanted to do. So you can share that as well as your
Sure.
time. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yes, it's something I always knew. Yes and no, I guess would be my response. So when I was younger, I was always kind of the child that I always like my mom and dad would say, well, you ask too many questions. Which I guess I used to think it was just asking questions, but it may have been talking back. But look, I don't know. I was always respectful in my mind. I didn't think I was,
Then we are the same people.
Okay. But I think I've always been someone that saw problems or saw situations that I thought, well, I don't think anyone should be in that situation. It doesn't seem, it seems like there's a way for this to be fixed. And so I did a mock debate. It was the Gore Bob Dole election. So I was like in the sixth grade, and I had to watch the debate. So I watched, Clinton and, all the debates. I was assigned to be Jack Kemp, who was the Republican vice president nominee. And so I wanted to be a Democrat because my parents are Democrats, but I really had no clear awareness of the difference between the parties. And I really watched and listened. And that was when I finally, for the first time, could kind of understand that when I would see homelessness or I'd see people that were hungry, that this was on the micro level, this was on the macro level, how some of these issues kind of bubbled up. And so at that point, it was when I first kind of knew like, oh, well, maybe I want to be elected, but it was because I was this 11-year-old. So you just think, well, if this is what they are, then I should do the same thing. So fast forward, I spent a year in South Africa in college in Cape Town, at the University of Cape Town. And that's where I actually learned about policy. This is in like 2004. So when I was in college, there was no policy programs. You did political science, you did sociology, economics, but there was no real clear policy. It was all more theoretical. You would dibble and dabble in policy, but still very theory more related. And that's when I really got a chance to dig deeper into social policy and economic policy. And I did my senior thesis on it. Fast forward to grad school, I realized as I worked in the policy space, I said, you don't have to be an elected official to have an impact on policy, right? I can be an administrator, I can do work in the nonprofit public policy space. And then moving to Baltimore and beginning to see some of the challenges is when I began to think a little bit differently of, well, if I'm able to, do I have more impact on how some of these issues get solved, right? So it's a bit of somewhat of the scientist in me it also. And I'll tell you that I don't have all the tools, as an elected official to solve all the problems, but I do know that I have a voice and I have the attention to these issues that I cannot say that no one else, and we're multi-member districts in Maryland. I can't say that, I know my colleagues are paying attention, but we're not all in the same committee. And so I know that when I hear something that I know has an impact on my community, that has an impact on communities of color across the state of Maryland, it's incumbent upon me to speak up and to be a part of helping make the legislation better, helping stop the legislation if there's no way to make it better. And so I would say that I think the way I approach my career is I focus on reducing inequality. I'm focused on reducing racial disparities. And where I was prepared, I was able to come into and run for public office when I thought perhaps public office was an opportunity. But all of that was paid by my interest and dedication to racial disparities, to dealing with increasing equity. And so I think the best way that you can be prepared is just to kind of keep staying on that path. You might take a stop, move and go down this road or that road, but it all leads back to that main road of whatever your key interests have been and are.
Thank you. Stephanie, Dr. Dollamore.
Hi, good morning. Delegate Wells, I just want to thank you so much for being here. I am logging in today from Baltimore. I am in the 43rd district, not in the 40th, but really honored to have you here because I think so highly of the Baltimore City delegation. I think all of you are so strong and you've achieved so much for our city already and you're doing so much more. And I really thank you for your time during legislative session to be here with us this morning. I work at Gallaudet University and I work for the Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council, and I do policy work to support people with disabilities in Maryland. And I've been looking over the legislation you've been sponsoring, and I think it's worth this group knowing just a few things that stood out for me. Your work on studying the living wage of education support professionals. You are sponsoring a bill around collective bargaining in higher education. The Trans Health Equity Act, you're a co-sponsor on that. And particularly of interest to me is the Baltimore Regional Transit Authority, the study to look at our transportation in Baltimore City, among the many, many bills that you're sponsoring. You're very busy. I've been thinking during this conversation about your role as an elected official, how it's so important that you hear from the people in our communities and that we have a voice in perspectives that are important to you and knowing what's of value to all of us. And been thinking a lot about how accessible legislative session is to people or not, right? Like I have the luxury of going as part of my job, but if I was working 2-3 jobs or didn't have transportation down to Annapolis, it's just not accessible to give oral testimony, right? But let alone to know the schedule that changes daily, right? So I'm really curious to know if money was no cost, which is not, or other resources were no cost, like what would be your vision for a more accessible legislative session? How can we get our communities more involved? What would you love to see happen? Because I'm just really curious about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So one thing I want to say is this kind of to the question before, but to yours. So I have a master's in public policy. And the one thing that I always told myself was the day that I don't want to engage with the communities that I'm seeking to help is the day I need to not be a public, practitioner. And so I really believe strongly in engagement with with our constituents is critical. Like, I don't believe that there's any scenario where anything I do should not be informed by or not have been developed with or developed because of issues that constituents have brought to me. And I think that a lot of my colleagues, Delegate Regina T. Boyce and Delegate Embry, getting to know Delegate Embry more, but she's wonderful. But Delegate Regina T. Boyce is like my big sister, and she is wonderful. And we kind of are cut from the same cloth where we don't shy away from the hard conversations because we know that people are like living these issues. And so we want to, we don't want like the softball, right? We want, let's like talk about what the problems are. And, maybe it might be a little terse at times, but it's because we are really trying to find a solution. But in terms of accessibility, so Annapolis is one of the most inaccessible, I think, capitals in the country. I am originally from California. I will be honest. I grew up in Southern California. Our capital is in Sacramento. California is a much bigger state than Annapolis. But I know for a fact that it is really hard to get people here. COVID created some opportunity because of the virtual testimony process. And I know some of our constituents and advocates and lobbyists were saying, oh, well, we really need to be there in person because, it's just not, but it's like, okay, well, the average person can't be here, but they were but we were able to have more input and testimony from people because they could testify virtually. So we have this session, we are providing the virtual option as well as the in-person option for people to testify. So I think that like that is a step in the right direction. But I sometimes will have people do announcements from the floor, and it's interesting when there'll be folks that have lived here their entire lives and they've never been to the Capitol. And that's not, I'm not making a value judgment on those individuals as to why or why not. But to me, when I hear that, it makes me think, I automatically always think, well, it's because it wasn't accessible to them. Right. And at some point, and then over time, when something's not accessible, when it does become accessible, you've not thought about it anymore because it's not part of your, you know, your kind of like your line of thinking. And so we are trying to do things where we're definitely, we try to, in our district in the 40th, we do a pre-session forum where we really talk to people. We lay out some of the key bills. So one way I try to, you know, be active and letting people know what's happening is through social media. Sometimes I'm not good at that, but my newsletter every week, we try to do our newsletters to keep on top of people. Folks do email. Email is definitely something that our office does get a lot of. And so sometimes, you know, through that process of emailing, people can write in and we take tally of what people are writing in about, whatever the bills are. We are making, you know, keeping tally of it. And at the end of the session, everyone who's emailed us, we send them an end of session letter that provides full outline of all the stuff that's happened. So we do our best just to stay engaged. And then, you know, when we're out of session, trying to, you know, stay engaged with door to door, talking to folks. And then I have a community liaison. So we work through our community associations who are helpful, but they're also not always representative of all the communities. Because again, it's a capacity, it's a time, right? It's a, you know, and so oftentimes that the representation of the leadership is not always representative of the community that they represent, but they are at least tapped into a lot of the challenges. So that engagement, that accessibility is something that we always have to work on and just stay vigilant and being mindful of all the different things. When we have our community events, you know, out of session or during session, we try to do them in the evening because we know that people need to go to work or try to provide daycare and we really have continued to kind of utilize the virtual option. We are doing more in person, but I think we've noticed that participation is always a little bit higher when we do virtual.
Thank you.
And we're also doing closed captioning since you're at Gallaudet, and we are doing closed captioning as well for our virtual events and real-time closed captioning as well. So
yeah, the session has been, I mean, it's been wonderful to see you all, especially in the House, improving the guidelines for participation using plain language, and also seeing the real-time captions, and your ADA coordinators, I don't know, are fantastic. They're very responsive. So you all are doing a lot. Yeah, there's just, I feel like there's always more that can be done in terms, like all of session happens during the day, right?
Yeah.
So it's very hard for people.
We have a few folks that have are living with disabilities that are part of the legislature. And so I know I have been making an effort to like think more about like ways in which even just how the layout of Annapolis, right, or the layout of our campus. You know, I believe we meet all ADA, but like ADA is not exhaustive, right? There's other ability, I forget the proper terminology, my brain is drawing a blank, but there's other accessibility factors that we need to continue to improve on. So we're always trying to think through it, and you all are helpful in that.
Really grateful for your time. Thanks again.
Thank you.
We've got 3 more minutes. If anyone doesn't have a question, I still got more. So any other takers? Okay, so in my class, I teach urban policy, community development, you know, and I teach statistics as well. But, you know, in my urban policy class, you know, we look at some not so, some very sobering situations. and you see them every day, I'm sure. But one of well, gosh, which one, right? But so many, but between transportation, housing, and education, let me just talk on education, right? And I'm curious, we're at the higher ed level, but I want to understand what your thoughts at the K-12 level, and what the state of Maryland and or other states are doing in regards to improving the educational system in the United States. The funding for it, I mean, we don't see enough funding, and it's not, I think Maryland might be better than a lot of other states, but we don't see a lot of funding in that area, and that goes into so many things, the resources for the students, classrooms, as well as the pay, right, for the educators. There's so many things to talk about in that, but I wanted to just throw out the word education at the K-12 level and hear your general thoughts around that and its funding and so forth.
Yep, I see a baby's head right there, little. This
yes,
is very
she just turned 1.
So many things. So we know that our students are competing in a global economy. That's, I think it used to be American, but no, it's like students here in Maryland, students in every state are always competing in a global economy. The funding piece is clearly, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we faced over time. And at least in Maryland, we passed 2 years ago, we passed a Blueprint for Maryland's Future, which was a historic, I think, generational investment, I think, that we hadn't seen in like almost half a century in our education. But in Baltimore City, though, which there was a lawsuit, I forget when, I think the 90s that moved into the 2000s, where there was, the state is in the Constitution, it says that they will educate basically our children, and they were not fully funding and educating properly Baltimore City students, a majority Black jurisdiction, and historically the largest Black jurisdiction. And so not currently, but historically. And so, we are dealing with systemic underfunding, racist systemic underfunding, and then we're dealing with underfunding. Even if we look at our colleagues in places like Montgomery County that are more wealthy, even their educational attainment, it's the wealthiest jurisdiction in the state, and I think it has some of the top wealthiest cities in the country. Even in Montgomery County, their educational attainment levels were not always on par with the national or internationally. And so I think one of the challenges, so we definitely have to continue to look at the funding in Baltimore, the community schools model in Prince George's County, in areas where you have a concentration of power, of poverty, you have a community schools model, and also in the Blueprint, there's a focus on identifying resources in those concentrated poverty census tracts, because there's a myriad of other challenges that those students are coming to school facing, right? They're in communities that might have a lot of blight, where unemployment or underemployment is still a challenge. And so understanding that what happens in those four walls of the school is impacted by what's happening outside. And so identifying strategies to strengthen the communities, to strengthen the resources inside of the school that can follow that student home, whether it's for the student or for parents, is something that I think the community schools model has proven to be really successful. So expansion of that funding. Right now, we're also, I know we have a teacher shortage in this country right now. And so we're trying to deal with that aspect, but we're also trying to identify ways to have more diverse teachers, and more teachers that are culturally competent, because we know that that is also a part of the success in learning that our students have. And I'm actually really grateful that I serve with a lot of elected officials that are teachers, that have been teachers, who really provide some very important knowledge and information. My colleague in the 40th district, Delegate Ampry, he was a teacher for several years. And so really providing that information and that perspective to other elected officials is helpful, because I think it helps us make better decisions and be aware. I think the last thing I want to talk about is this college and career readiness piece, but I want to talk about it a little bit differently from the pipeline and exit. So by that, I mean when they leave high school. I think one of the challenges though is, I don't want to call anyone a failure. So I don't think that's fair to say, but I do believe that businesses have asked for exceptions. They want tax breaks and what have you. And I'm not saying that there's no need for tax credits and tax breaks, but when you give away tax breaks, TIF or pilots in lieu, payment in lieu of taxes, it draws from the revenue. And I think most of you all know that local revenue, county revenue, city revenue makes up a large portion of, or should make up a large portion of the revenue generated that does go back into our city, specifically into education. And so I think where I feel like there's a need for, where the conversation is not as stern as I would say, as it is with our public educators, which, everyone must be held accountable. But oftentimes those employers are not part of providing a landing place for our young people, right? They're not. And so I think that the private sector really does need to step up, not just in saying we want to help with the internship and we want to help with exposure. Are you going to hire our young people? Are you going to provide them with a career that's going to be viable, or at least be the on the ramp for their career, right? That's going to be viable with the pay, quality of life that we talked about earlier in our conversation when we opened up for questions. So, are you going to also train? Because I talk to employers. I work in construction. A lot of the construction contractors I work with, they're bought into a registered apprenticeship model, right? They're paying money into that model to help train the people they want to hire. They're not just saying, come to us knowing how to weld. They're actually helping support them becoming certified welders. And so I think that that's a big part of this conversation, that we talk about being ready for the global economy. It's not just, do you understand the basic math and reading and arithmetic? Is this company going to hire you? Are they going to provide you a viable pathway? And I think that that's something that's been lost over time. When I talk to my elders, in Baltimore was a heavy manufacturing. There was a direct pipeline from high school to Bethlehem Steel. And Bethlehem Steel built the steel that was used in the Golden Gate Bridge, right? Like it was a beacon of industry, that company. There were direct pipelines to other companies. There's a lot of industry here, micro, biotech, engineering, a lot, there's so much here. And the more that those companies and industries are partnering to place and provide career pathways, I think the stronger that pipeline is. And I think that we often forget that, especially as adults, if you're in a pathway where someone's telling you, keep doing this, I'm going to promote you, and they never promote you, at some point you're going to leave or become disengaged. And our young people, they see their peers leaving school and not having, whether they go career ready, because there's even in our CTE program, students that leave high school, they don't go into CTE pathways. So we got to identify, and you can't separate them not going only and say, well, they didn't want to. I guarantee you there was a gap there somewhere in terms of them getting access to an actual job that was going to put them in a good pathway. So I think that we also, as we talk about education, there is a whole slew of conversation and focus on achievement, which is important. But if you're going to achieve, and then there's nowhere for you to go with that achievement that's going to pay you or treat you well or provide a pathway, what am I achieving for? And I don't want to say, I'm not trying to say, oh, don't go to school, or that's not the intention, the point I'm trying to make. I'm just simply saying is that, like, there is a sequencing effect. And if you sequence and do everything right, and then when you get to the point where you're supposed to finally get a job or get into college or what have you, and there's no clear next step, that's going to be, I think that does have an impact on some of our students' long-term interest in education and what it means for their future.
Oh, sorry. Thank you so much. This has been a very enlightening conversation. I hope everyone agrees with me on that, but and I'm so grateful for your presence here today and enlightening us. Thank you so much, Ms.
Absolutely.
Wells.
Absolutely.
Can we get some rounds of applause for
Thank you.
that?
It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you also for hiring as your chief of staff one of my old students.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
Yes, Matt is great. He is phenomenal. I'm very lucky to have him.
Okay, so thank you. We will be in touch again,
Absolutely.
Delegate Wells. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Dr.